Hi, I'm Austin Schmidt, and I work as a hospital staffing surveyor in Oregon Health Authority's Hospital Staffing Program. OHA's Hospital Staffing Complaint System is how Oregon's hospital staffing laws, including the updates in 2023's House Bill 2697 and 2025's House Bill 3294, are enforced in Oregon. In this video, we will review the actions under the Safe Harbor provisions and explain the documentation and information hospitals must provide to qualify for Safe Harbor. A hospital may avoid a sanction for failure to comply with an approved staffing plan by taking all the actions outlined in the Safe Harbor provisions of the law. In addition, under House Bill 3294, Safe Harbor provisions apply to a hospital unit that uses the statutory nurse-to-patient ratios in Oregon Revised Statutes 441.765 if the hospital has not adopted a nurse staffing plan for that unit and the unit is one of the specific unit types listed in Oregon Revised Statutes 441.765. For more information on the application of the statutory nurse-to-patient ratios, see the Hospital Staffing Short on statutory ratios and non-ratio units. Safe Harbor provisions are outlined in Oregon Revised Statutes 441.793, subsection 4, and were in House Bill 2697, section 19, subsection 4. If the hospital takes all the actions listed in the Safe Harbor provisions, OHA may not impose a civil penalty for a violation that is substantiated in an investigation. This means that the investigation found a violation in that the hospital did not comply with the adopted staffing plan or with the applicable statutory nurse-to-patient ratios in a unit that is required to be using the statutory ratios. But, despite the violation, there is no sanction because the hospital qualified for Safe Harbor. The Safe Harbor actions are A. Scheduling staff in accordance with the unit's staffing plan. B. Seeking volunteers from available qualified employees to work extra time. C. Contacting qualified employees who made themselves available to work extra time. D. Soliciting per diem staff to work. And E. Contacting contracted temp agencies that the hospital regularly uses if temp staff are permitted to work in the hospital by law or any collective bargaining agreement. Hospitals are not obligated to take these actions, as Safe Harbor efforts are voluntary, and the decision to take these actions is ultimately a decision made by the hospital administration. A hospital is not required to use Safe Harbor, but if a hospital chooses to take all required Safe Harbor staffing actions under Oregon Revised Statutes 441.793, the hospital must provide documentation demonstrating compliance if the necessary documents were not already included with the needs list submission. In addition, the hospital must provide other information as requested by OHA in order to establish that the Safe Harbor requirements were met. When investigating a complaint for failure to comply with an adopted staffing plan or failure to comply with statutory ratios, OHA will request in email that hospitals provide additional information about Safe Harbor details where Safe Harbor may apply, including what actions were taken, who was responsible for each task, and how each task was documented. This includes documentation explaining what the expected patient census was for the date and shift, how many staff were scheduled for the date and shift, how the hospital identified qualified employees who might volunteer for the shift, how the hospital contacted qualified employees to volunteer for the shift, how the hospital solicited per diem staff to work, and whether the hospital has contracted temporary agencies for the unit under investigation, and, if so, a brief description of what requests, if any, were made for the unit. For the tasks above, OHA will ask the hospital which employee was responsible for completing the task and what method was used for completing the task. If a hospital does not provide information in response to questions about Safe Harbor actions, OHA may determine that safe harbor efforts were not made, and civil penalties may be imposed for the violation of the staffing law. For more information about Safe Harbor and hospital staffing resources such as FAQs, webinars, and hospital staffing shorts, please visit the hospital staffing website at www.healthoregon.org/hospital staffing. Thank you.